All right, so there's two things I want to talk with you about today. Cumulative happens tomorrow, and it covers two topics. One is the one that you just took, and you're going to get back in a minute here. And the biggest trouble people had was taking a quadratic and then solving it. So if it said, for instance, x squared plus 6x minus 7 equals 0, they get a little confused. And where did I warn you that people would make their mistake? On the quadratic formula. Where in the quadratic formula? The thing underneath the root. That is correct. Everybody, please put this in the quadratic formula and take a special careful look at the stuff underneath the root. No calculators. Pause for a second while you put that into the quadratic formula. So here's what you should have done. You should have done negative 6 plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is 36, minus 4ac, and the a and the c underneath the root are always the trouble spot. And 2 times 1 is 2. So I bet you a lot of you are going to get your test back, and you're going to look at yours, and you're going to figure out, what did I do wrong? And it'll be that you did something wrong underneath the root. 4 times 1 times negative 7. Now, so often it's that people don't notice that there's 2 negatives in there. So you're not going to subtract. You're going to add. And you're going to take 36 plus 7 times 4 is 28. Right? All right. So you should have had here's negative 6 plus or minus the square root of, what's 36 plus 28? 60, what? Ooh, look at that, 64. And that works out to be a nice number. So what does that mean? Well, it comes out to 8. So then that means I get 2 answers. Negative 6 plus or minus 8 over 2. So I do it once with plus and once with minus. Okay, once with plus would be negative 6 plus 8, which would be 2. And 2 divided by 2 is 1. 1 is one of my answers. And then the other answer is negative 6 minus 8 should be negative 14. Divided by 2 is negative 7. And that also tells me that if I would have been looking closer, what could I have done in the first place on this problem? I could have factored it. All right, so if I would have taken and factored this thing right off the bat, you don't have to go back and do that, but I'm just going to make a point here, that I could have said x plus 1 and x minus 1 and x plus 7. That would have told me the answers right away. Negative 7, positive 1. See? All right. That's the main kind of problem that people did wrong, and I'm going to hand these back to you in a moment, and you can grieve over them. If you had a 22.5 or better, then you do not need to make corrections. Now, before we do the corrections part, I realize that there's 6 of you that don't have to do corrections, and so you're going to want to just get going on your homework. So let me talk to you about the homework for today. It's got some of the stuff we just did. Some of the problems just like this that I just did. But it's also, it's a cumulative, so doesn't it have old stuff on there? Specifically, it has stuff that's about a month old. So everybody shut your iPads. Take your blank sheet of paper you have out in front of you, flip it over. And if there's anything particularly intelligent that I say here, you should maybe write it down as your notes, thing you should study for this part of the test tomorrow. All right, so right now, if I had a graph, and they say graph this, do you remember what to do to graph that? It's not in a very graph-friendly format. What format is it in? Factored form. That was one of the things that was on that quiz is, you know, what are the 3 kinds? Factored form. What could I get if I multiplied this all the way out? General form. And lastly, what could I get if I took general form and then did the quadratic, no, did the half and square thing to it? I could get vertex form. Okay, so those are the 3 major forms. Vertex form, general form, and this form, factored form. Now, if I asked you to graph this, would you know how to start? If you started with this, 4 and negative 3 halves, what are those guys? the x-intercepts. That'd be a smart thing to do. You wouldn't have to, but you could start with that. So if you go 4 and negative 3 has us negative 1.5, could I figure out where the vertex is without even knowing vertex, like the half and square thing? Yeah, we had a whole test on it before I even taught you half and square. So how would you find the vertex? You'd go, where's the line that runs right down the middle? You remember this deal? And then the vertex has to be on that line. And let's say that this line that runs right down the middle of negative 1.5 and 4, what is that, by the way? What's exactly between 1.5 and 4? Well, I add them together and divide by 2, and that makes 4, and then minus 1.5 makes it 2.5, and you divide it by 2. 2.5 divided by 2 is 2.5 divided by 2 is 1.25. All right, so then this line right here has to be at 1.25. And that means the vertex, wherever it is, somewhere down here, is going to have to be at 1.25 comma something. How do you figure out that last thing? You stick the 1.25 in for x. If I put 1.25 in for x, it'll tell me what y has to be. Do you remember that process? All right, I'm going to give you another one like that. So let's say I had, I'll kind of cut the long story short. Let's say this is at negative 2 and this is at 6. Figure out for me, where is that dotted line, the axis of symmetry? Add them together, makes 4, divided by 2 is 2. I agree, it's at 2. So what's the vertex? Well, you don't know the whole vertex, but what part do you know? The x. What is the x again? Well, this is x equals 2. It's the line that runs right down the middle, so this is 2. And then how do I figure out the y? I'd have to have the equation for it. Can you tell me the equation for it? You can. It kind of looks like this, right? Except, don't you know the x-intercepts, and therefore don't you know the roots, and therefore don't you know what this little equation would look like? Remember this? So this negative 2 here would tell me to put in what in there? X plus 2. You get how negative 2 would solve it now? And then how about that 6 there? Don't I have the equation now? Unless there's a stretch factor. That'd be unless there's a flip, and I'd have to tell you if there's a flip or a stretch factor. But all right, do you get how these two numbers gave me these two things? Do you get that? Okay, and do you get how I got the dotted line because it just ran right down the middle of them? All right, then that tells me the x of the vertex, and now I know the x is 2. How do I figure out the y? Put the 2 into where? Into this equation right here with a 2 there and a 2 there. So that's going to be 2 plus 2 is 4 times 2 minus 6 is negative 4. What's 4 times negative 4? Negative 16. So this goes down a ways before it would ever have the vertex down here. All right. So that's a power review. It's kind of shortish, but you got a lot of time in class today to do two things. One is to fix your mistakes on the tests, and I'm going to hand those back. I don't want to record test answers, but I'll help in class here on the board with showing you how to fix some of your mistakes on the test, and then you'll have a bunch of time to work on your homework. And the homework is got today's date on it, which is 1-13. So on January 13th, look up the one that's assigned January 13th. It looks like this, and it says review for cumulative assessment on the top. That's your homework for tonight. Okay, this very first question, it says what form is it in now? What form is that in again? Vertex form. What are the other forms? General and factored. And so how are you supposed to factor that? Well, you can't factor it until you get it multiplied out. So how do you get general form? You generally just multiply them out. But don't go x squared plus 4 squared. You got to go x plus 4 and x plus 4. And then when you're done multiplying, foiling it out, then you do the minus 1 at the end. Okay? So this part gets done first, and you'll have x squared plus 8x plus 16. Then you can subtract 1. All right, so that's just a quick reminder. Please feel free to come up and ask for more help. This is a review day, and so you got a lot of time to work. All right, that's all I got for you for the video for today.